as Gavin said, my name's Martin Pedley. I work for a company called Skanska, which is a building and construction and development company. We've got about 55,000 employees worldwide, which about 5,000 are in the UK. I'm a civil engineer. How many of you know what civil engineering is? Anybody heard of civil engineering? Okay, well, if you think civil engineers actually have a huge impact on the lives around you. I'm going to show you a few little pictures in a minute, but right, okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about careers in civil engineering, but hopefully you'll go away and you'll understand what civil engineering is and it does. So really, what is civil engineering? Well, there are lots of definitions, but one of them, which is quite an old definition, talks about harnessing the power of nature for the benefit of mankind, and that sounds very sort of grand. But actually, what civil engineers do is they try and work within the built environment to provide a better society. And actually, we tackle many of the problems we talk about, like climate change, housing, sanitation, all of those sorts of areas. So what does a civil engineer look like? Well, many people think sort of engineers are a bit techie and they have a stereotype, but the reality is many different types of people can be a civil engineer, and you can start off your career in lots of different ways. So don't have any sort of prejudices, but sometimes people look very different when you see them without all of their protective equipment on or out in a construction environment. So what do we do? I mean, take for example, this is the M25 motorway. I think, have any of you travelled on the M25? Because it's sometimes known as the world's biggest car park. But what we've been doing recently in my company is we've been widening it, and hopefully now it does flow a little bit freer. So civil engineers are often involved in building infrastructure such as roads and railways to help people travel and help the economy get going. Another area would be like this, for example, where we take existing buildings and we replace them with much newer ones. And this is a hospital in East London. So again, we're helping society by actually providing the buildings and the facilities for people to improve the quality of life. This is probably one that you're less enthusiastic about, which is taking an old school and keeping it as a school and upgrading it so it's actually a better learning type facility. And in one of the big areas, we talk a lot about the environment now and environmental damage. You know, we've had many years of industry and we have problems with pollution. Civil engineers are starting to provide a lot of the solutions that allow, shall we say, fish, wildlife and people to have a better quality of life. So really, civil engineering projects are things that help society to have a more sustainable future. What we shouldn't confuse civil engineering with, though, although it involves a lot of the building trades, are some of the poor practices. So being a civil engineer isn't about going out and causing a mess in the streets, leaving sort of waste out, or poor behaviours and people having lots of accidents. That is not what civil engineering or professional building trades do. So don't be put off by the fact that we do see some very bad examples of people who work in our industry. So I thought probably the easiest thing was just tell you a little bit about my career and how I ended up in civil engineering, because to put it quite frankly, when I was your age, I had no real idea what I wanted to do. So this is sort of my story. In terms of when I was at school, I had lots of ideas. I'd actually wanted to go in the army for quite a while, but I didn't really know why I wanted to go in the army. I thought, well, shall I do an apprentice? Shall I try and go off to university? Nobody in my family had gone to university before, so I didn't know what to study. But through thinking about the army, I learned a little bit about civil engineering, and it appealed to me. But what sort of things did I like? Well, first of all, I actually quite liked being outside. I like being able to travel and see new places, and generally the fresh air. I liked working with teams, whether that was, doing things in class or whether it was actually, for example, I was in the Boy Scouts, I did Duke of Edinburgh. I like solving problems with teams and groups of other people. And that's one of the key things in civil engineering. It's not about working by yourself, it's about actually finding solutions. I guess I also quite liked how things got built and get constructed. And I was rather better quite often at taking things down, but a lot of people in civil engineering also get involved in demolition. So ultimately I decided I wanted to become a civil engineer, and I enrolled on a university course. And I went to Surrey University, which is in Guildford, and I enrolled on a 4-year course. And the reason I chose that course was one, because obviously when you look at university, you want to look at what universities are going to be open to you, what grades you think you're going to get. In the same way if you want to enroll in a technical college. But I chose it because it suited me, the grades. But I like the fact that it was a 4-year course, and I spent the 3rd year working in industry and actually getting some real experience in civil engineering. And I was fortunate enough to spend a year working in Paris. And this is me, and I know I don't look any older now than I did then. But this is me working on one of the first sites, which was building a new high-speed train line from Paris to the southwest of France. And I think if many of you are thinking of going into civil engineering or the built environment, you know, there's a lot of discussion about projects like High Speed 2, which of course is a major railway and very similar to how I started my career. Not only whilst I was working in France, I came across quite a lot of interesting technical problems, and I decided to then carry on and do a PhD. Now, you know, there's lots of people, they call you boffins and things if you go and work in a university, but I was quite lucky because I was involved in some very practical research that involved sort of building this machine here, but also solving problems now and writing sort of documents that are used by designers to actually solve current day problems. I think the downside of being in university too long is that you end up quite poor at the end of it. So I used, whilst I was doing this, I managed to get a company to sponsor me, which is I'm still working for now, 20 odd years later. So I actually sort of started off, although I had a degree, I went off to work for my current company, Skanska, and initially I was involved in carrying out design work, so using the skills I'd learnt at university, putting into use to actually make sort of, or provide information for the builders out on site to actually construct new buildings. So the sorts of projects I was involved in were things like water treatment works, general housing, so looking at the foundations in particular for houses, supermarkets and general retail environment, and then working on the London Underground projects. So that was all about design, but after about 18 months or so, I then started to get more involved in some of the pricing of these, so that actually as a company we could go and make offers to clients to see if they could afford to build these projects. So it was a vast array of skills, both using sort of engineering and mathematical and logical skills to actually going out and meeting customers. So after several years of that, I was actually given the chance to go out and work in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia. And I worked on this project, which was a hydroelectric scheme, which was out in the jungle. And believe it or not, we used to actually get elephants sort of walking across the site. So, you know, one of the things you have to bear in mind with engineers and civil engineers, when we have these very large projects, we do have an impact on the environment. We do sort of cause some level of disturbance. But one of the things that's really hounded into you when you work with a professional organisation is that you actually have to preserve that environment. You have to think about solutions that create the minimum impact and have the greatest benefit in the long term. So after that, 18 months in the jungle, I was then spent a bit more time in Asia working on various construction projects, from high-rise buildings to underground systems. During that time, I was actually lucky that I got lots of different types of experience, and that allowed me then to sit my professional exams, so I became what's known as a chartered engineer. And that means now as well, I also give training to other engineers. So, you know, not only am I an engineer, I'm also a sort of tutor and a mentor to many of my colleagues. And I suppose by the time I got into my 30s, and that probably seems a long way off for many of you, you start to take on more responsibilities. So whilst you're still very much an engineer and you have to make judgments about engineering projects, you then start to manage people. And people are actually, you know, for engineers we like things that are logical. People are much more difficult. But if you enjoy working with people and you enjoy motivating people, you know, a career in engineering is actually quite exciting. So, you know, through this, I got involved in a number of schemes. I mean, such as the Gherkin, which is a famous building in London. I, for example, got involved in a new extension to Dublin Airport, and also what's known as High Speed 1 now, or the Channel Tunnel Rail Link. So I got involved in lots of ways in these different schemes, from, as I say, actually providing designs, supporting teams that provided those designs, and going out and checking to make sure things were designed and constructed properly. And then finally, as I get sort of into my 40s, and I'm still in my 40s, just in case any of you have any doubt, and we're not going to go on until I'm like 60 or 70, so it does finish fairly soon. Now, actually, what I do is I spend a lot more time managing a business of engineers. So that's actually making sure that I've had to learn a lot more about all the different skills in construction and civil engineering and building. I spend a lot of time getting involved in recruiting people, making sure they're trained to do the job, that we do things in the right way, as well as actually making sure that we go out and win work. So some of the time it's not just about managing my own team. I also have to meet customers. We have to talk about how the particular engineering challenges and problems they have, and how we might solve them in the best way and the most economical way. So some of the recent schemes I've been involved in and my company's been involved in, we built a very large retail supermarket scheme just in front of St. Paul's. And you can imagine all the logistics and how you work in an inner city environment. You actually knock buildings down, but you actually allow everything else around you to go on without creating noise and dust and disturbance. So that was a very large scheme in London. More recently, we had to do some work at the port of Dover, and this was to put in some dolphins to stop ships impacting as they come into the harbour, and that was working literally out over in the wilds of winter in the sea. And recently, we've also been working on a scheme in London called Crossrail, which is actually building, building a very long underground system all the way from the west to the east of London, which is really going to help London in terms of commuters getting from one side of the city to the other, and hopefully we'll go on and see many more of those sorts of schemes. In addition to that, we're also always looking at how we introduce new technologies. So if you're the sort of person who likes working with computers, doing design type works and computer-aided works, there's a new thing called building information modeling, which is very popular now. And this is, again, allowing us to help us plan projects and build them in the most economic way and cause the minimum of disturbance, and have the lowest environmental impact. And I guess the thing that sort of takes me back, some of you might think this looks like a prison, but actually one of the things in my career that's gone on a full cycle is that I'm actually now involved in going back to my original primary school. So this is where I started my education many years ago. And actually my company is now going back and actually rebuilding part of that school and regenerating it for future generations. And I think that sort of brings me back to one of the things about if you're a civil engineer and you're a sort of person who actually cares about society and cares that we do things in a better way, improve the environment, then actually it's a profession that's very much well worth being involved in. So I've sort of given you a little bit of a snapshot about my career in civil engineering, and I've done lots of interesting things. But I guess what happens if you actually want to become a civil engineer or you want to be involved in civil engineering? Well, obviously I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll hang around with a couple of my colleagues. So please come and speak to me afterwards. If you want to go online, there's an organisation called the Institution of Civil Engineers, and they have an excellent website. And the thing there, it tells you about, depending on exactly when you want to start in a more sort of practical or vocational way. It's not just about, you don't have to go to university to get into civil engineering. Many of my colleagues have come through, they've left school, they've done an apprenticeship, they've then decided to do a bit of extra studying, and they've been given the support by a company. So in other words, apprenticeships and further training. But as I say, I did it through going to university, and then the Institution of Civil Engineers will help you go on and obtain professional qualifications. Or in terms of, if you're interested in specific examples of different companies, then you could look, for example, at my company, which is Skanska, and that will give you some idea of careers information. We've got some here if anybody's interested in that. So at that point, I'll shut up. Has anybody got any questions? Any thoughts? Anyone inspired by civil engineering now? Okay, well, we've got some little sort of freebies. If you're interested, we've got a couple of brochures which tell you a little bit about different routes into civil engineering. So please feel free and have a look on your way out. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.